Elara didn't know that the man watching her from the shadows of the shipping dock was the most powerful Alpha King in the Seven Realms. She didn't know that he had been searching for his fated mate for over 2 centuries, and she certainly didn't know that buying a one-way ticket to the mainland would trap her on a ship with the one person she could never escape. All she knew was that she had to run. The ticket, clutched in her trembling fingers, represented everything she had left in the world. 3 months of saved copper coins, skipped meals, and mending clothes by candlelight until her eyes burned. The merchant vessel Siren's Call would depart with the morning tide, carrying her away from the Crescent Moon Pack lands forever, away from Marcus and his cruel hands, away from her father's debts and his willingness to sell her to pay them, away from a life that had never been hers to choose. "Last call for boarding!" the harbour master shouted, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn mist that rolled off the dark water. Elara shouldered her single bag and stepped forward, her worn boots clicking against the wet cobblestones. The dock bustled with activity despite the early hour. Sailors hauled cargo nets filled with mysterious crates. Well-dressed passengers in fine travelling cloaks waited in small clusters, their voices low and urgent. Something felt different about this ship. Wrong, perhaps. The other passengers were too polished, too watchful. Their clothes spoke of wealth that seemed out of place on a common merchant vessel. Guards stood at intervals along the gangplank, their hands resting casually on sword hilts. But Elara had no choice. This was the only ship leaving port for a month, and Marcus would come looking for her soon. He had made it clear what would happen if she tried to refuse his proposal again. She handed her ticket to the boarding officer, a grizzled man with silver threading through his dark beard. His eyes swept over her simple brown dress and threadbare cloak before he nodded curtly. "Welcome aboard, miss. Cabin assignments are posted in the main hall." The ship was magnificent. Elara had expected rough wooden planks and the stench of fish and sweat. Instead, polished brass gleamed in the lamplight, and rich carpets covered the floors. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, despite the gentle sway of the vessel. This was no merchant ship. This was luxury beyond anything she had ever seen. Fear prickled along her spine. Had she made a terrible mistake? She touched the small knife hidden beneath her cloak, the only protection she carried besides her wits. "First time sailing?" The voice was deep, warm, with an accent she couldn't place. Elara spun around and found herself staring up at a man who seemed to fill the narrow corridor with his presence. He was tall, broader than any man had a right to be, with dark hair that looked like it had been touched by moonlight at the temples. His clothes were simple but clearly expensive, black leather and fine wool that moulded to his frame like they had been made specifically for him. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, storm grey, intense, focused on her with an attention that made something in her chest flutter like a trapped bird. "Yes," she managed, stepping back until her shoulders hit the wall. "I mean, I've been on fishing boats, but nothing like this." He smiled, and the expression transformed his stern features into something devastatingly handsome. "The Siren's Call is one of a kind. I happen to need transportation to the mainland as well." His gaze swept over her face with an intensity that made heat creep up her neck. "I'm surprised to see someone travelling alone. These waters can be dangerous for a woman without protection. I can take care of myself." The words came out sharper than she intended, born from years of having to prove her worth and defend her choices. Instead of taking offence, his smile widened. "I'm sure you can, but that doesn't mean you should have to." There was something in his tone, something that made her think of safety and warmth and belonging. Impossible things, dangerous things. "I should find my cabin," she said, clutching her bag tighter. "Of course, don't let me keep you." He stepped aside with fluid grace, but she could feel his eyes on her as she hurried down the corridor. Her cabin was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed and a tiny porthole that looked out over the endless expanse of dark water. She set her bag on the bed and sank into the single chair, her hands shaking now that she was alone. Who was that man? Why had talking to him felt like standing too close to a fire, dangerous but impossibly warm? A knock at her door made her jump. She opened it to find a young woman in a crisp uniform holding a silver tray. "Compliments of the captain, miss. He wanted to ensure all passengers were comfortable." The tray held fresh bread, cheese, dried fruit and a small pot of honey. Real food, more than she had eaten in a single meal for months. "I didn't pay for meals," Ilara said, confusion making her voice small. The woman smiled. "No charge, miss. The captain is very particular about hospitality." After the woman left, Ilara stared at the food. On a merchant vessel, passengers provided their own meals, or paid extra for ship's rations. This level of care was reserved for nobility or honoured guests. She moved to the porthole and peered out at the dock, now growing distant as the ship pulled away from shore. In the growing light of dawn, she could see other vessels in the harbour. Fishing boats, cargo ships, a few small pleasure craft, but nothing like the Siren's Call. This ship was larger, more elegant, clearly built for someone with power and wealth beyond imagination. As the coast of her homeland disappeared into the morning mist, Ilara felt something shift inside her chest. It started as a flutter, then grew into a pull, like a golden thread connecting her to something she couldn't see. She pressed her hand to her sternum, frowning. The sensation was impossible to ignore, warm and insistent and somehow comforting. For the first time in months she felt safe. That should have been her first warning. By evening she had explored what parts of the ship were open to passengers. The dining hall was appointed with fine china and silver. The library contained books bound in leather with gold leaf titles. Even the common areas spoke of wealth and careful attention to detail. The other passengers were equally mysterious. They spoke in low voices and moved with a confidence that suggested familiarity with luxury. Several had the bearing of guards or soldiers, despite their fine clothes. When dinner was served, Ilara found herself seated at a long table with a dozen other passengers. The conversation flowed around her in accents she didn't recognise, discussing places she had never heard of. The treaty negotiations in the northern reaches. Pack dynamics have shifted since the Lunar Council. Blood Moon ceremony was postponed until... Pack dynamics, Blood Moon ceremony. These weren't normal travellers discussing normal things. Her appetite fled as understanding crept over her like cold water. She was surrounded by shifters, powerful ones based on their casual discussion of pack politics and territorial disputes. And somewhere on this ship was the man from the corridor, the one who had looked at her like she was the answer to a question she hadn't heard him ask. She excused herself and retreated to her cabin, her heart racing. She had fled one supernatural complication only to land in the middle of something much larger and more dangerous. But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the gentle creak of the ship and the whisper of waves against the hull, that golden thread sensation in her chest pulsed warm and steady. For the first time in years, despite everything, she slept without nightmares. The truth came with the dawn. Ilara woke to voices outside her cabin door, crew members speaking in low, respectful tones that carried the unmistakable deference of servants addressing their master. His Majesty requested updates on the weather patterns. Ensure the private dining room is prepared for this evening. No one is to disturb him during his morning council. His Majesty. Her blood went cold. She pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear more, but the voices had moved on. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, as if responding to some invisible tension. When she emerged for breakfast, the ship felt different. The crew moved with military precision, their casual friendliness from yesterday replaced by formal efficiency. Passengers spoke in even lower whispers, occasionally glancing toward the upper decks with something that looked like reverence or fear. "You look troubled." Ilara spun around to find him standing behind her, the man from the corridor. In the morning light streaming through the large windows of the dining hall, he was even more imposing. His presence seemed to command the space around him, other passengers unconsciously stepping aside to give him room. I'm fine, she said, but her voice cracked on the words. His storm-grey eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Are you? You seem to have realised something that's upset you. Who are you? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. I told you, a fellow traveller in need of transportation. The crew called someone His Majesty this morning. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite the fear crawling up her spine. Merchant ships don't carry royalty. Don't they? He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his scent, cedar and winter air, and something wild that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. Perhaps you misjudged what kind of ship this is. This is your ship. It wasn't a question. Yes. The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her hand flying to the wall for support. You own the entire vessel. I do. His voice was gentle now, as if he were trying not to spook a frightened animal, along with several others. I want off. The words came out sharp and desperate. Dock at the next port, let me off. I'm afraid that's not possible. What do you mean it's not possible? Her voice rose, causing several passengers to look in their direction. He noticed, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Walk with me, he said, not quite a request. This conversation requires privacy. She wanted to refuse, but something in his tone made it clear that refusal wasn't truly an option. He led her up a narrow staircase to an upper deck that was clearly private. The morning wind whipped her hair around her face as she stared out at the endless expanse of blue water. No land in sight. Nowhere to run. These waters are dangerous, he said, moving to stand beside her at the rail. Pirates, sea monsters, worse things that hunt alone. We won't reach safe harbour for another week. You planned this. The accusation fell flat in the salt air. Did I? He turned to face her fully, and she was struck again by how large he was, how he seemed to block out the rest of the world. Did I know you would be on the dock yesterday morning? Did I arrange for you to purchase passage on my ship? She wanted to say yes, but the truth was more terrifying. This was coincidence. Fate. The kind of impossible convergence that happened in stories, not in real life. Why won't you let me leave? For a long moment he was quiet. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before, as if the words cost him something. Because the moment I saw you, something in my chest recognised you. Something that's been empty for over 200 years suddenly felt complete. Her breath caught. 200 years. He was old, far older than he looked, ancient by shifter standards. You're him, she whispered. You're the Alpha King. I am. The admission should have terrified her, should have sent her running for the nearest lifeboat. Instead, that golden thread in her chest pulsed warm and insistent, as if it were trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. What do you want from me? Nothing you're not willing to give. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were warm against her skin, and she had to fight the urge to lean into the touch. I want to know your name. I want to understand why you were running. I want to keep you safe. My name is Ilara. The words slipped out before she could think better of them. Ilara. The way he said it made it sound like something precious. I'm Darius. She had heard that name whispered in packed territories across the realm. The Alpha King who had unified the 7 kingdoms. The one whose very presence could end wars or start them. The most powerful shifter alive. And he was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. I don't understand what's happening, she said, her voice small. Neither do I. Completely. His honesty surprised her. But I know that from the moment I caught your scent on the dock, my wolf has been at peace for the first time in centuries. I know that every instinct I have is telling me to protect you, to keep you close, to never let you go. You can't just keep me prisoner because of some feeling. I'm not keeping you prisoner. His voice was firm but patient. When we reach the mainland, if you still want to leave, I'll arrange safe passage to wherever you want to go. But until then, you're under my protection whether you want it or not." She stared up at him, searching his face for deception. Instead, she found something that looked like vulnerability beneath the authority, as if her answer mattered more than kingdoms or treaties or any of the responsibilities that came with his crown. "Why?" she asked. "Because you're mine." The words were quiet, certain. "And I think, if you're honest with yourself, you can feel it too." The golden thread in her chest gave a sharp tug, as if responding to his voice. She pressed her hand over her heart, frowning. "What is that?" she murmured. "The bond." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The connection between fated mates, you feel it, don't you? The pull?" Fated mates. She had heard the term whispered in her pack, usually with a mixture of awe and skepticism. The idea that the moon goddess chose perfect matches, that some wolves were destined for each other across lifetimes. "That's just a story," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" He raised his hand, palm out, not quite touching her. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the almost magnetic pull between them. "Then why does this feel like coming home?" She jerked back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know you. I don't know anything about you except that you're powerful enough to buy entire ships and dangerous enough that your crew treats you like a god. Then get to know me." The invitation was quiet, sincere. "I have a week to prove to you that I'm not the monster you're imagining. And if I decide you are, then I'll let you go." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "I give you my word." The word of an Alpha King. In the supernatural world, that meant something. Breaking a sworn oath would cost him power, possibly his crown. "Why should I trust you?" "Because," he said, moving toward the stairs that led back below deck, "you don't really have a choice, and because somewhere deep down you already do." He left her alone on the deck with the wind and her racing thoughts. Below she could hear the sounds of a ship in motion, crew members calling orders, the creak of wood and rope, the steady rhythm of waves against the hull. She was trapped on a ship belonging to the most powerful man in the 7 realms, surrounded by water and supernatural politics she didn't understand. But when she closed her eyes and focused on that strange warmth in her chest, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like possibility. That evening, a crew member delivered an invitation to dine in the captain's private quarters. The note was written in elegant script on heavy paper that probably cost more than she used to make in a month. She almost refused. Almost sent back word that she would take her meals in her cabin, alone and safe from storm-grey eyes and impossible promises. But curiosity won. The captain's quarters were magnificent. Rich dark wood, leather-bound books, maps of territories she had only heard about in stories. Darius stood when she entered, pulling out a chair at a small table set for 2. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I wanted answers." She sat carefully, hyper-aware of his presence as he moved to the chair across from her. "If I'm going to be stuck here for a week, I want to understand what I've gotten myself into." "Fair enough." He poured wine into crystal glasses, the liquid deep red in the lamplight. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She took a sip of wine and nearly gasped. It was better than anything she had ever tasted, smooth and rich with hints of spice. "Start with why you were at that dock yesterday morning." "I was leaving a council meeting with the coastal alphas, boring treaty negotiations." His mouth curved in a slight smile. "I was planning to return to the capital overland, but something told me to take the ship instead." "Something told you?" "My wolf was restless, agitated, like he knew something was coming." Darius leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "I've learned to listen when he gets like that. It's kept me alive for 2 centuries. A servant appeared with the first course, some kind of delicate soup that smelled like herbs and ocean air. Ilara ate slowly, aware that this single meal probably cost more than her family saw in a month. "Your turn," he said. "Why were you running?" The question she had been dreading. She set down her spoon, staring into the rich broth. "My father owes debts he can't pay," she said finally, "to some very unpleasant people. They offered to forgive everything if he gave them me." Darius went very still. When she looked up, his eyes had darkened to the colour of storm clouds. "What kind of debts?" "Gambling, drinking, bad investments." She shrugged, trying to seem casual about the betrayal that had shaped her entire life. "He's weak, always has been. My mother died trying to protect him from his own stupidity." "And the people he owes?" "Rogues, led by a man named Marcus, who thinks he can claim me as his mate through force and intimidation." The wine was making her bold, loosening her tongue. "He's wrong." "Yes," Darius said quietly, "he is." Something in his tone made her look at him sharply. The mild, patient man from earlier was gone, replaced by someone harder. Dangerous. "You can't do anything about it," she said quickly. "It's not your problem." "Isn't it?" He leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. "If what I suspect is true, if you're my mate, then anyone who threatens you threatens me, and I don't tolerate threats." The certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent warmth spreading through her chest, chasing away fears she had carried for months. "I'm not your mate," she said, but the words felt hollow. "Aren't you?" He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent sparks up her arm, and she had to bite back a gasp. "Tell me you don't feel that. Tell me your wolf isn't singing right now." She couldn't, because her wolf was singing, a low, pleased rumble that she hadn't felt since she was a child, before life had taught her that safety was an illusion and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Most of the best things are." His thumb traced across her knuckles, the touch gentle but possessive. "I've waited 200 years for you, Ilara. I can wait a little longer for you to catch up." When she returned to her cabin that night, her head was spinning with wine and possibility and the memory of his hands on hers. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the ship and the steady beat of her own heart. For the first time in her life, she wondered what it would be like to stop running, to choose to stay. The storm came on the third day like a living thing intent on destroying everything in its path. Ilara woke to the violent pitching of the ship and the sound of rain hammering against her porthole with the force of bullets. She barely managed to dress before the vessel lurched so violently that she was thrown against the cabin wall. Outside her door she could hear shouting, crew members calling orders over the howling wind. The ship groaned and creaked as if the ocean were trying to tear it apart plank by plank. She grabbed her cloak and struggled to the door, fighting against the ship's movement. The corridor was chaos. Passengers clutched the walls for support, while crew members rushed past, carrying coils of rope and emergency supplies. "All passengers to the lower decks," a sailor shouted as he passed her. "Captain's orders." Ilara joined the stream of people moving toward the main hall, but something made her look up toward the stairs leading to the upper decks. Through a window she caught a glimpse of the storm, towering waves that looked like liquid mountains, rain slashing horizontally across the deck. And standing in the middle of it all, unmoved by the chaos, was Darius. He wore only a white shirt and dark pants, both soaked through and clinging to his frame. His hair was plastered to his skull, but he stood with his feet braced wide, barking orders to his crew with absolute authority. The storm raged around him, but he looked like he was commanding it rather than fighting it. Even from a distance she could see the wolf in him, predatory grace, supernatural strength, power that had nothing to do with his crown and everything to do with what he was born to be. "Miss, you need to get below," a crew member said, touching her shoulder. She nodded but couldn't look away from the figure on deck. As if sensing her gaze, Darius turned. Even through the storm and distance, his eyes found hers immediately. The golden thread in her chest pulled tight. Then the ship lurched again, more violently than before, and she heard something that made her blood freeze. Howls, not the wind, not the storm. Wolves. Multiple voices raised in a hunting song that cut through the tempest like knives. "Rogues!" someone whispered behind her. "Gods help us, there are rogues in the water." Panic rippled through the passengers. These weren't ordinary pirates. They were supernatural predators who could shift between human and wolf form even in the ocean, using the storm as cover for their attack. "Everyone below decks now," the crew member said more urgently. "Seal yourselves in and don't come out until we give the all clear." Ilara let herself be herded down the stairs with the others, but the moment they reached the lower level, she broke away from the group. She couldn't cower in a cabin while a battle raged above. Not when Darius was up there facing gods knew how many enemies. The thought surprised her. When had she started thinking of his safety as her concern? She found a service stairway that led to a storage area near the upper decks. Through a small window she could see part of the main deck where Darius and his crew were preparing for battle. The rogues came over the rails like shadows given form. They moved with inhuman speed and coordination, their eyes glowing in the darkness of the storm. Some remained human while others shifted mid-leap, landing on the deck as massive wolves with fangs bared. Darius met them without flinching. She watched him tear into his attackers with lethal grace, moving between human and wolf forms so fluidly it looked like a deadly dance. His crew fought beside him, but it was clear he was the apex predator among them. When he shifted fully, his wolf was enormous, silver-black with eyes like molten gold. But there were so many rogues, too many. One of them broke away from the main fight, heading straight for the stairway that led to the passenger quarters, heading for her. The window was too small to climb through, and by the time she reached the main deck it would be too late. The rogue would find the other passengers, defenceless and trapped below. Terror and desperation made her wolf surge to the surface. She had hidden what she was for so long, pretending to be weaker than she was, smaller than she was, but not now. Not when innocent people would die if she did nothing. She shifted. Her wolf was larger than most females, with unusual silver-white fur that marked her as something rare, something that should have been protected and cherished instead of hidden and scorned. She burst through the service door just as the rogue reached the main stairway. He spun toward her, lips pulled back in a snarl, but she was already moving. Years of running, of surviving, of fighting for every scrap of safety had made her fast and deadly when cornered. The fight was brief and vicious. The rogue was bigger, but she was smarter, using the storm and the ship's movement to her advantage. When it was over, he lay still on the deck, and she was bleeding from a gash along her ribs. She shifted back to human form, pressing her hand to the wound. The storm was already beginning to ease, the howls of the remaining rogues fading as they retreated into the dark water. "Ah, Ilara!" She turned to find Darius standing at the top of the stairs, still in his wolf form, but shifting back to human even as she watched. His clothes were torn and bloody, but his eyes were locked on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He had seen her shift, seen her fight, seen exactly what she was. "You're hurt," he said, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. "It's not bad." But when she tried to step back, her legs wobbled. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and cold. He caught her before she could fall, his arms coming around her with careful strength. "Let me see." "Darius, You shifted." His voice was rough, amazed. "Your wolf is beautiful, rare." She looked up at him, expecting to see calculation or greed, the look men got when they realized she might be valuable. Instead, she found something that looked like awe. "I've been hiding it," she whispered. "My whole life. Silver wolves are supposed to bring good luck to whatever pack claims them, so everyone wants to own one. I learned early that it was safer to pretend to be ordinary." "Ordinary." He laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Nothing about you is ordinary." He lifted her easily, carrying her toward the stairs that led to his private quarters. She wanted to protest, to insist she could walk, but the warmth of his body against hers felt too good to give up. His cabin was larger than hers, with a real bed and a fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the walls. He set her down carefully on the bed and moved to light more lamps. "Take off your cloak," he said, his back still turned. "I need to see how deep the wound is." "I can take care of it myself." "I'm sure you can." He faced her, and she was struck again by how large he was, how he seemed to fill the space around him. "But you don't have to, not any more." Something in his tone made her hands shake as she unfastened her cloak. The simple dress underneath was torn and bloody along one side, and she could feel the wound throbbing with each heartbeat. Darius knelt beside the bed, his movements careful and controlled. "May I?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hands were gentle as he examined the gash, his touch sending sparks along her skin despite the pain. "It's not deep, but it needs cleaning." He moved to a cabinet and returned with supplies: clean cloth, antiseptic, bandages. This might sting. She bit back a gasp as he cleaned the wound, her hands fisting in the bedsheets. But it wasn't just the pain making her tense. It was the intimacy of the moment, the way his hands moved over her skin with practiced care. "You've done this before," she said. 200 years of battles tend to teach you field medicine." His voice was quiet, focused. "Hold still." As he worked, she found herself studying his face. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the careful concentration in his storm-grey eyes. This close, she could see faint scars along his neck and hands, evidence of fights survived, enemies defeated. "Why did you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Do what?" "Risk yourself to save people you don't know." He finished bandaging the wound and sat back on his heels, his eyes searching her face. "You could have stayed hidden. No one would have blamed you." "I couldn't just watch someone get hurt when I had the power to stop it." She shrugged, trying to seem casual. "It's who I am." "Yes," he said softly. "It is." The way he looked at her made heat rise in her cheeks, like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "Darius?" Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I've never—" She stopped, took a breath, tried again. "I've never had anyone look at me the way you do, like I matter, like I'm worth something." Something fierce and protective flashed in his eyes. "You are worth everything." "You don't know me, not really. I know you risked your life to save strangers. I know you've been hiding your true nature to survive. I know you're strong enough to fight rogues and gentle enough to worry about hurting my feelings." He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "I know that when I'm near you, something in my chest that's been broken for 2 centuries feels whole again." She leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. "This is happening so fast." "It is." His thumb traced across her cheekbone, sending shivers down her spine. "Does that frighten you?" "Yes." She was being honest, maybe for the first time in her life, but not as much as it should. Ilara. The way he said her name made it sound like a prayer. "I want to kiss you, but only if you want me to." She should say no, should keep the distance between them, maintain the walls that had kept her safe for so long. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never expected to find. Hope. "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her slowly, carefully, like she was something fragile and precious. His lips were warm and firm, and when she sighed against his mouth, he deepened the kiss with a gentleness that made her heart race. When they broke apart, she was breathing hard, her hands fisted in his shirt. "Stay with me tonight," he said against her lips. "Just sleep. I want to know you're safe." Every instinct she had developed screamed at her to refuse, to maintain her independence, to keep her options open, to never trust anyone with that much power over her well-being. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw the same desperate hope she felt in her own chest. "Okay," she said. He helped her into one of his shirts, soft cotton that smelled like cedar and winter air, and settled her under the covers before banking the fire. When he joined her, he kept careful distance between them, close enough for comfort, but far enough to make it clear he meant what he said about just sleeping. "Darius," she said into the darkness. "Yes? Thank you for tonight, for all of it." "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me enough to stay." Outside, the last of the storm winds whispered against the windows, but inside, for the first time in her life, Ilara felt completely safe. The golden thread in her chest hummed with contentment as she drifted off to sleep, and she thought she heard him whisper something just as consciousness faded. "Mine," he said, so softly she might have dreamed it. "Finally mine." But instead of fear, the words filled her with a warmth that followed her into her dreams. The attack came at dawn, when the ship was still recovering from the storm. Ilara woke to the sound of splintering wood and inhuman roars that made her wolf cower deep in her chest. She jerked upright in Darius's bed, her heart hammering as she tried to understand what was happening. 3 ships surrounded them, not rogues this time. These vessels flew the crimson banners of the Shadow Coast Pack, and their hulls bristled with weapons designed to pierce supernatural hide. "Stay here," Darius commanded, already pulling on his clothes with swift efficiency. "Lock the door behind me and don't come out no matter what you hear." "What's happening?" "Someone told Marcus where to find you." His voice was grim, deadly, "and he's brought friends." Terror flooded her system. Marcus, the rogue who claimed her as his mate, who had threatened to hunt her to the ends of the earth if she tried to escape his claim. "How?" she whispered. "How could he know I'm here?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Darius moved to a cabinet and withdrew weapons, a sword that gleamed like starlight, daggers that hummed with supernatural energy. "Whatever happens, don't leave this room, promise me." She nodded, but her mind was racing. If Marcus was here, it wasn't just for her. He would know exactly who owned this ship, what capturing the Alpha King would mean for his own power and territory. This was her fault. Her presence had put Darius and his entire crew in danger. The battle began in earnest as Darius left the cabin. Through the windows she could see grappling hooks biting into the ship's rails as enemy shifters swarmed aboard. The sound of clashing steel and supernatural snarls filled the air. She pressed herself against the door, listening to the chaos outside. Darius's voice rang out above the din, commanding his crew with absolute authority, even as she heard the distinctive sound of his wolf's battle roar. Minutes passed, then an hour. The fighting seemed to ebb and flow, sometimes distant, sometimes terrifyingly close to the cabin door. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. "Where is she, Your Majesty?" Marcus's voice, mocking and cruel, carrying clearly through the ship. "I know she's here. I can smell her fear." "You'll get nothing from me," Darius replied, his voice steady despite whatever they were doing to him. "Won't I? Boys, remind the Alpha King what happens when someone takes what belongs to me." The sound that followed, Darius's controlled grunt of pain, shattered something inside her chest. They had him, were hurting him, because of her. She couldn't stay hidden while he suffered for her mistakes. Moving quietly, she searched the cabin until she found what she was looking for, a service passage that led to the ship's ventilation system. She had noticed it the night before, a narrow space designed for maintenance and emergency access. She shifted to her wolf form and squeezed through the opening, following the cramped passages until she could see into the main hold where they were keeping Darius. He was chained to the central mast, silver bonds that burned his wrists and made his wolf form impossible to maintain. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, and his shirt was torn, revealing more wounds across his chest. Marcus paced in front of him like a predator savouring the hunt. He was smaller than Darius, but no less dangerous, with the lean build of a rogue who survived by being faster and more vicious than his enemies. "I have to admit," Marcus was saying, I didn't expect to find the great Alpha King playing nursemaid to a runaway Omega, though I suppose even gods need entertainment." "She's not your entertainment," Darius said quietly, "and she's not yours to claim." "Isn't she?" Marcus smiled, showing too many teeth. "Her father's debt is to me. That makes her my property until I decide otherwise." "Property." Darius's voice dropped to a growl. "You see her as property." "What else would she be? Weak little thing, hiding what she really is, afraid of her own shadow." Marcus moved closer, leaning down until he was eye level with Darius. "Though I'll admit there's something appealing about breaking something that's been another man's pet." Rage flooded through her so completely that she nearly lost control of her wolf form. The golden thread in her chest burned like molten fire, responding to Darius's pain and her own fury. Marcus's men were spread throughout the hold, 6 of them, all focused on their captive Alpha. They hadn't noticed the ventilation grate directly above their heads. She had one chance, one moment of surprise before they realized what she was and how dangerous she could be when cornered. The grate was designed to be removable from the inside for cleaning. She shifted back to human form, worked it loose silently, and dropped. She landed behind the group in a crouch, shifted mid-fall, and took down the nearest rogue before he could even turn around. Her silver wolf was death in motion, faster than they expected, stronger than her size suggested, driven by protective fury that made her nearly unstoppable. The second rogue managed to get his weapon up, but she was already inside his guard, her teeth finding his throat with surgical precision. "Ilara, no!" Darius shouted, but she was beyond hearing him. The third rogue tried to run. She brought him down before he reached the stairs. By the time Marcus spun around to face her, 3 of his men were dead, and the others were backing toward the exits with wide, frightened eyes. She shifted back to human form, blood on her lips and murder in her eyes. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "Well?" He recovered faster than she expected, his shock giving way to calculating interest. "This is unexpected. I was told you were weak, broken." "You were told wrong. Apparently." He gestured to his remaining men, who moved to flank her. "Though it doesn't change the outcome. You're still coming with me." "No," she said, "I'm not. Your father's debt has nothing to do with me." She took a step forward, letting her wolf show in her eyes. "I am not his property to sell. I am not your prize to claim. And I am not afraid of you any more." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's face. "You think being the Alpha King's whore gives you power. He'll tire of you soon enough, and when he does—" "She's not my whore," Darius said from behind the silver chains, his voice deadly calm. "She's my mate, and if you touch her, I will tear you apart with my bare hands." The declaration hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before the gods themselves. Mate, not just fated attraction or political convenience, but the sacred bond that made 2 souls into one. "Your mate," Marcus laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it now. "You think I care about your supernatural fairy tales. She's mine by right of—" "By right of what?" Ilara interrupted. "Force? Fear? The assumption that I have no choice in my own fate?" She moved to the chains holding Darius, her hands finding the silver locks that bound them. The metal burned her skin, but she didn't care. She had spent months learning to pick locks to survive on the streets, skills Marcus had never bothered to discover she possessed. "I choose," she said as the first chain fell away. "I choose who I trust. I choose who I follow. I choose who I love." The second chain snapped open, and I choose him. The final chain hit the deck with a ringing sound like a bell tolling. Darius surged to his feet, his wolf already rising to the surface, eyes blazing with protective fury. Marcus's remaining men broke and ran. "This isn't over," Marcus snarled, backing toward the stairs. "You think you can hide behind him forever? Think he'll always be there to protect you?" "I don't need him to protect me," Ilara said, and meant it, "but he's mine to protect too." The golden thread in her chest pulsed with fierce certainty. This man, this Alpha King who looked at her like she was precious, belonged to her just as much as she belonged to him. Marcus fled. When the enemy ships retreated, flying their crimson banners like surrender flags, Ilara found herself alone in the hold with Darius. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shaky and suddenly aware of what she had done. She had killed, had chosen violence to protect what mattered to her, had claimed a mate in front of witnesses in a way that made the bond legally and supernaturally binding. Ilara. Darius's voice was gentle as he moved toward her slowly, his hands raised like he was approaching a spooked animal. "Look at me." She lifted her gaze to meet his, expecting to see horror or disgust at what she was capable of when pushed too far. Instead, she found admiration, pride, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "You saved me," he said. "You were hurt because of me. It was my fault they found you." "No." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm despite the silver burns on his wrists. "It was their fault for thinking they could take what's mine." "I meant what I said," she whispered, "about choosing you." "I know." He leaned down until his forehead rested against hers. "Do you know what you did when you freed me? What declaring me as your mate in front of witnesses means?" She nodded. "It means we're bound, legally, by pack law and supernatural law." "It means you can't take it back." His voice was rough, uncertain. "Even if you change your mind later, even if you decide this was all a mistake?" "I won't." The words came out fierce and certain. "I won't change my mind." Something in his expression shifted, vulnerability giving way to fierce possessiveness. "Good," he said, and kissed her. This kiss was different from the gentle exploration of the night before. This was claiming, marking, the physical manifestation of the bond that now tied their souls together for eternity. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she could feel something fundamental had changed between them. The golden thread in her chest was no longer just a pull or a suggestion. It was a bridge connecting her to him in ways that made her feel less alone than she had ever been in her life. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" He smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, it was completely unguarded. "Now we go home." Home. The word should have terrified her. Returning to his world, his responsibilities, the court politics, and supernatural dangers that came with being the Alpha King's mate. Instead, it felt like a promise. That night, as the ship continued toward the mainland, under stars that seemed brighter than before, Ilara lay in Darius's arms and felt something she had never experienced before. Peace. The golden thread hummed between them, strong and sure, carrying the promise that wherever they went from here, they would go together. She had stopped running. She had chosen to stay. The royal harbour of Valdris rose from the morning mist like something from a dream. Ilara stood at the ship's rail, watching as towering spires of white stone and gleaming crystal came into view. The city sprawled across 7 hills, connected by bridges that defied gravity and architecture that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Ships filled the harbour, not just sailing vessels, but floating palaces that moved without wind, their hulls carved with symbols that pulsed with supernatural energy. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Darius said from beside her, but his voice carried tension she hadn't heard before. "And it's about to become very complicated." She followed his gaze to the dock, where crowds had already gathered. Even at this distance, she could see the formal banners, the ceremonial guards, the elaborate reception clearly prepared for the Alpha King's return. "They know about me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Word travels fast in the supernatural world. By now, every major pack on the continent knows that I've claimed a mate." His arm tightened around her waist, protective and possessive. "They'll want to see you, judge you, test you." Fear crawled up her spine, but she pushed it down. She had faced rogues and storms and the cruelest parts of her own past. She could face a crowd of curious nobles. What do I need to know? That you are my equal in all things, my queen, not my pet or trophy. His voice was firm, carrying the authority that made kingdoms bow to his will. Anyone who treats you as less than that will answer to me. The ship docked with elaborate ceremony. Trumpets sounded from the harbour walls as gangplanks were lowered, and official delegations boarded to greet their returning king. Ilara had expected pomp and politics. She hadn't expected the woman who swept aboard like a force of nature, her silver hair elaborately braided and her deep blue gown radiating power that made the air itself feel electric. "Darius," the woman said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested she was used to being obeyed. "You've caused quite a stir." "Lady Visera." Darius's greeting was respectful but wary. "I trust the kingdom has survived in my absence." "Barely." Lady Visera's pale eyes found Ilara, studying her with an intensity that felt like being examined under a magnifying glass. "So this is the girl who has half the council in an uproar?" "This is Ilara," Darius said, his voice carrying a warning. "My mate, your future queen." "We'll see about that." The words landed like a slap. Ilara felt her wolf bristle, but before she could respond, Darius stepped forward, his presence suddenly filling the space with dangerous energy. "Excuse me?" "The council has concerns," Lady Visera said, not backing down despite the threat radiating from him. "About her bloodline, her suitability, the political ramifications of such a hasty bonding." "My bonding is not subject to council approval." "Your marriage is. Your coronation of a queen is." Lady Visera's smile was sharp as a blade. "Surely you remember the laws you swore to uphold when you took the crown?" Ilara felt the world tilt. Marriage, coronation. She had thought claiming each other as mates was the end of their story, not the beginning of an entirely new set of challenges. "What laws?" she asked, finding her voice despite the growing dread in her chest. Lady Visera turned to her with something that might have been sympathy. "Any woman who would be queen must prove herself worthy in the eyes of the 7 houses. There are trials, tests, ancient protocols that ensure the bloodline remains strong." "What kind of tests?" "Combat, politics, leadership, supernatural mastery." Each word hit like a physical blow. "Many don't survive." The golden thread in Ilara's chest went cold. Around them, she could sense the crowd on the dock growing larger, more restless. Word was spreading that the Alpha King had returned with his mysterious mate, and everyone wanted to see what manner of woman had captured the heart of the most powerful shifter alive. "The trials can be waived," Darius said quietly, "under certain circumstances." "What circumstances?" Ilara asked. Lady Visera's smile widened. "If the king chooses to abdicate his throne rather than subject his mate to potential death." The silence that followed was deafening. Ilara stared at Darius, understanding flooding through her like ice water. He could save her from the trials, but only by giving up everything he was: his crown, his kingdom, his responsibility to millions of supernatural beings who depended on his leadership. "No," she said. Both of them turned to look at her. "No," she repeated more firmly. "I won't let you give up your throne for me. Ilara, you are the Alpha King for a reason. Your people need you. I won't be the selfish woman who destroys that because I'm too weak to face a few tests." Something fierce and proud flashed in Darius's eyes. "You're not weak." "Then I'll prove it." She turned to Lady Visera, lifting her chin despite the fear clawing at her throat. "What's the first trial?" "Combat," Lady Visera said, and there was something like approval in her voice now. "Against Lady Seraphina of the Northern Reaches. She has been expecting this opportunity." The name meant nothing to Ilara, but the way Darius went rigid told her everything she needed to know. "Seraphina is a born warrior," he said quietly. "Trained since childhood. She's never lost a formal duel." "She's also expected to be your queen," Lady Visera added helpfully. "Her family has been preparing for the alliance for decades." Of course, a political rival with everything to lose if Ilara succeeded. A woman who had been raised to be queen, trained to fight, groomed for the very role Ilara was now claiming. "When?" Ilara asked. "Tonight, at the proving grounds before the assembled court." Lady Visera's eyes glittered with anticipation. "To the death or until one yields." Terror clawed at Ilara's chest, but she kept her expression calm. She had survived this long by being underestimated. Let them think her weak, untrained, easy prey. "I accept." The crowd on the dock erupted into whispers and excitement as word of the challenge spread. Ilara could feel their eyes on her as she disembarked with Darius, cataloguing her simple dress, her unadorned appearance, her obvious lack of royal training. They saw a nobody, a mistake, a tragedy waiting to happen. Let them. The royal palace was a maze of marble corridors and soaring ceilings, filled with courtiers who bowed to Darius and stared at Ilara with expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. She was shown to chambers that were larger than the entire house she had grown up in, given servants who treated her with the careful politeness reserved for someone whose status was temporary. "You don't have to do this," Darius said when they were finally alone in her suite. "I can refuse the challenge, claim it as an insult to my mate Bond." "And start our reign with me hiding behind your protection?" She shook her head. "Your people need to see that I'm strong enough to stand beside you, not cower behind you." "Seraphina isn't just strong, she's deadly." His hands found her shoulders, gripping tight. "She's been trained by the best fighters in 7 kingdoms. She has weapons and armor forged by master craftsmen. She has magic." "Magic?" "Elemental control. Fire and ice. She can literally freeze her opponent's blood or burn them alive from the inside." The fear was a living thing now, clawing at her ribs and making it hard to breathe. But underneath it was something else, determination that burned like forge fire. "Then I'll have to be faster." That evening, the proving grounds were packed with every noble, courtier, and supernatural dignitary in the kingdom. The circular arena was carved from black stone, warded with symbols that would contain magical attacks and prevent interference. Seraphina was everything Ilara had feared, tall, beautiful, deadly graceful as she moved through her pre-fight rituals. Her armor was masterwork steel that seemed to flow like liquid, and the sword in her hands glowed with runes that promised supernatural sharpness. Ilara wore simple leather and carried a plain steel blade borrowed from the palace armory. She looked like exactly what she was, a girl from nowhere, out of her depth and fighting for her life. "This is madness," someone whispered in the crowd. "She'll be slaughtered." The king should have chosen better. Poor thing doesn't know what she's walking into. Darius sat in the royal box, his expression carved from stone, but she could feel his tension through their bond like a physical ache. The herald announced the combatants, the terms, the stakes. Life or yield, winner takes all. "Begin!" Seraphina moved like lightning, her blade trailing fire as she struck. Ilara barely managed to dodge, the heat singeing her hair as the sword passed inches from her throat. The crowd gasped. Someone laughed. Seraphina pressed her advantage, each strike accompanied by bursts of flame or spears of ice that forced Ilara into increasingly desperate defensive maneuvers. The other woman was everything the Whispers had promised, skilled, powerful, utterly confident in her inevitable victory. But Ilara had learned to fight for her life against opponents who were bigger, stronger, better equipped. She had learned that sometimes the only way to win was to embrace what made you different, instead of trying to match your enemy's strengths. She stopped trying to fight like a noble warrior and started fighting like a survivor. When Seraphina launched another fire attack, Ilara rolled underneath it and came up behind her opponent's guard. Her blade found the gap between armor plates, drawing first blood. Seraphina snarled and spun, ice gathering around her hands. Lucky strike. Was it? Ilara smiled and let her wolf show in her eyes. What happened next was less a duel than a revelation. Ilara moved with inhuman speed and grace, her silver wolf nature allowing her to flow between human and shifter advantages without fully transforming. She was faster than human, stronger than expected, and utterly unpredictable. Seraphina's magic was powerful but required focus and positioning. Ilara denied her both, staying close, staying mobile, turning the arena into a chaotic dance where technique mattered less than instinct. When she finally pinned Seraphina to the ground with a blade at her throat, the entire arena had gone silent. "Yield," Ilara said quietly. "I yield," Seraphina gasped. The roar that followed shook the arena walls. Ilara stood, offering her hand to help Seraphina up, an act of respect that earned approving nods from the crowd. "The first trial is complete," Lady Visera announced, and for the first time her voice carried genuine respect. "Lady Ilara has proven her combat worthiness." That night, Darius found her on the balcony of her chambers, staring out at the city lights below. "2 more trials," she said without turning around. "You don't sound worried." "I'm terrified." She leaned back against his chest as his arms came around her. "But I'm also angry. They think I'm not good enough for you. Think I'll be weak or selfish or bring shame to your crown. And I'm going to prove them wrong." She turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. "I'm going to be the queen this kingdom deserves, the partner you deserve." He kissed her then, fierce and proud and full of the love she could feel burning through their bond. "You already are," he whispered against her lips, but she knew the hardest tests were still to come. Politics, leadership, the kind of challenges that couldn't be won with speed and instinct alone. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her smile. Let them underestimate her again. She was learning to enjoy proving people wrong. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of trials, politics, and the slow, steady process of becoming the woman she was meant to be. The political trial came 3 days after her victory in the arena. Ilara found herself seated at a horseshoe-shaped table surrounded by the most powerful supernatural leaders in the 7 kingdoms, tasked with negotiating a treaty between 2 rival pacts whose territorial dispute had been simmering for decades. They expected her to fail, to stumble over protocols she had never learned, to make promises she couldn't keep, to prove that a girl from nowhere had no business playing at being queen. Instead, she listened. Really listened to what lay beneath the posturing and demands. Both packs had lost wolves to rogue attacks along their shared border. Both were afraid, hurt, grieving losses they couldn't prevent alone. "You don't need more territory," she said quietly when the shouting reached its peak. "You need security, protection, the knowledge that your children can run in your forests without fear." She proposed joint patrols, shared watchtowers, a formal alliance that pooled their resources instead of competing for scraps of contested land. The treaty was signed before sunset. The 3rd trial, supernatural mastery, should have been impossible. Ilara had hidden her silver wolf nature for so long that she had never learned to use it properly. While other shifters trained from childhood to harness their abilities, she had spent years suppressing hers. But hiding something wasn't the same as lacking it. In the crystal chamber deep beneath the palace, surrounded by ancient symbols that hummed with power, she finally let her wolf free completely. Not just to fight or run or survive, but to be everything she was meant to be. The silver light that poured from her was blinding. It filled the chamber, spilled through the corridors, reached into every corner of the palace until the very stones sang with her power. When it faded, every supernatural being in the kingdom could feel the change, the presence of a true Luna, an alpha female worthy of standing beside their king. The trials are complete, Lady Visera announced to the assembled court, and for the first time since Ilara had met her, the older woman smiled. Lady Ilara has proven herself in combat, leadership and power. She is worthy to be our queen. The roar of approval shook the palace foundations. That night, Darius found her in the garden, where she had taken to walking when the weight of expectations became too heavy. The roses were blooming despite the late season, their petals silver in the moonlight. "How do you feel?" he asked, settling beside her on the stone bench. Overwhelmed, terrified, proud. She leaned into his warmth, marvelling at how natural it felt to share space with him now. "Like I'm becoming someone I never imagined I could be." "You're becoming who you always were," he corrected gently. "You're just finally safe enough to let her out." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of the city beyond the palace walls. Their city now, their responsibility. "I want to go back," she said suddenly. "Back where?" "To my father, to Marcus, to everyone who thought I was nothing." She turned to meet his gaze. "I want them to see what they threw away, what they tried to destroy." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "That can be arranged." 2 months later, they returned to the Crescent Moon Pack lands with a royal procession that stretched for miles. Banners flew in the wind, carrying the symbols of the 7 kingdoms united under one crown. Elite guards rode in formation, their armour gleaming like starlight. Musicians played triumphant songs that could be heard for leagues in every direction. And at the centre of it all, in a carriage that looked like it had been carved from moonbeams and dreams, rode the Alpha King and his silver-haired queen. Ilara wore a gown the colour of winter sky, with a crown that had been forged specifically for her from metals found only in the deepest parts of the earth. She looked like something from legend, beautiful, powerful, utterly untouchable. Nothing like the frightened girl who had fled these lands with nothing but desperation and a one-way ticket to anywhere else. The pack that had cast her out gathered in the main square, their faces ranging from shock to awe to dawning fear as they realized who had returned to them. Her father stood at the front of the crowd, his face grey with terror. Beside him, Marcus looked like he was seeing a ghost, or a nightmare made manifest. "Citizens of the Crescent Moon Pack," Darius announced, his voice carrying the authority that had conquered kingdoms. "Your former pack member stands before you as my queen. You cast out a treasure and called it worthless. How do you answer for this insult?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ilara could smell their fear, their regret, their desperate hope that she might show mercy to those who had shown her none. She rose from her seat in the carriage, letting them see exactly what they had lost, what they had been too blind and cruel to value. "I forgive you," she said simply. The crowd exhaled as one, relief flooding through the square like a physical presence. "But I don't forget." Her voice carried now, clear and strong and utterly certain. "You taught me that worth isn't something others give you. It's something you claim for yourself. You taught me that home isn't where you're born, but where you're valued. You taught me that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly who they are." She looked directly at her father, at Marcus, at all the faces that had once held power over her life. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me to run, because running led me exactly where I needed to be." Marcus stepped forward, his face twisted with desperation and rage. "You think you're better than us now? Think your crown makes you special? You're still the same worthless—" He never finished the sentence. Darius moved with inhuman speed, his hand closing around Marcus's throat before the rogue could complete his insult. "Choose your next words very carefully," the Alpha King said quietly. "They may be your last." "Darius," Ilara's voice was gentle but firm. "Let him go. He insulted you, insulted his queen. And his words have no power over me any more." She looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. He can't hurt what he can't touch, and he can't touch me anymore." Darius released the rogue, who stumbled back into the crowd with fear written across his features. "However," Ilara continued, her voice taking on the tone of absolute authority, "his behaviour has shown that he remains a threat to the safety and well-being of this pack. Therefore, I hereby banish Marcus and his followers from these lands. They have 3 days to depart, and are forbidden from returning on pain of death." The crowd murmured approval. Even those who had supported Marcus couldn't argue with the justice of the sentence. "As for my father's debts," she said, turning to the man who had tried to sell her to pay for his mistakes, "they are forgiven, paid in full by the crown. You have a chance now to rebuild your life without the weight of past failures. Use it wisely." Her father fell to his knees, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Ilara, I know." Her voice was soft now, sad but no longer wounded. "You did what you thought you had to do to survive. We all did. But that part of our story is over now." The royal procession departed that afternoon, leaving the Crescent Moon Pack to process what they had witnessed. Ilara sat beside Darius in their carriage, watching her childhood home disappear behind them with something that felt like peace. "How do you feel now?" he asked. "Free," she said simply. "Finally, completely free." That evening they made camp in a meadow filled with wildflowers, their travelling court settling around them like a small city. Ilara walked through the camp, speaking with guards and servants and nobles alike, learning their names and stories and concerns. She was becoming the queen her people deserved, someone who led not from distance but from understanding. "You're thinking very seriously," Darius observed when she finally returned to their tent. "I was thinking about the future." She settled beside him on the silk cushions, marvelling at how far they had both come from that first encounter on his ship. "About the kingdom we're building, the children we might have someday, the legacy we want to leave. And what did you decide? That I want to build something better than what came before. A kingdom where girls like me don't have to hide what they are, where strength is measured by more than birth or bloodline." She turned to meet his gaze. "Where love is valued more than politics. That sounds like a worthy goal for a queen." "For a king and queen," she corrected. "We're partners in this, equal in all things, remember?" He kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of promises for all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them. When they broke apart, she could see their future reflected in his storm-grey eyes, challenges and triumphs, children and grandchildren, a love that would reshape the supernatural world. "I have something for you," he said, reaching for a small velvet box she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a ring unlike anything she had ever seen. The band was forged from the same rare metals as her crown, but set into it was a stone that seemed to hold captive starlight, silver and white, and impossibly beautiful. "It's made from crystallized moonbeam," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "There are only 3 in existence. One belonged to the first queen of the 7 kingdoms, one was lost to time, and this one was waiting for you." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her hand. When she moved, the stone caught the lamplight and threw it back in patterns that looked like dancing wolves. "Marry me," he said quietly. "Not because of mate bonds or political necessity or royal duty, but because I love you and want to spend eternity building something beautiful with you." "Yes," she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. The wedding took place 3 months later, in the great cathedral at the heart of the capital. Representatives from every supernatural community in the known world attended, along with humans who had made peace with the magical realm, and even a few beings from dimensions that touched theirs only rarely. Ilara walked down the aisle alone, by her own choice, wearing a dress that seemed to be cut from moonlight itself. She had no family to give her away, no past to bind her to tradition. She gave herself freely, choosing her future with eyes wide open and a heart full of hope. When Darius took her hand at the altar, the golden thread that connected them blazed so brightly that every supernatural being in attendance could feel it. This wasn't just a marriage, it was the forging of a bond that would echo through generations. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "With my heart I thee claim, with my life I thee honour." "With this ring I thee wed," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "With my heart I thee choose, with my future I thee trust." The kiss that sealed their vows lit up the cathedral like sunrise, and when the crowd erupted in celebration, it felt like the whole world was rejoicing with them. That night, as they danced at their wedding feast under stars that seemed to shine just for them, Ilara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had been nobody, a frightened girl with a one-way ticket and nothing left to lose. Tonight, she was everything. Queen of 7 kingdoms, mate to the most powerful alpha alive, and most importantly, herself. Completely, unapologetically, powerfully herself. "What are you thinking about?" Darius asked as they swayed together on the dance floor. "About how I used to think running away was the only choice I had." She smiled up at him, her heart full to overflowing. "I never imagined that sometimes running towards something is better than running away." "And what are we running toward now?" "Forever," she said simply, "the rest of our lives, all the adventures we haven't had yet, all the ways we're going to change the world." He spun her around, her dress flaring like silver wings, and when he caught her again, she was laughing with pure joy. "I love you," he said, and the words carried the weight of kingdoms, the promise of eternity, the certainty of a bond that nothing could break. "I love you too," she replied, "always and forever." As the celebration continued around them, as their people danced and sang and toasted to the future, Ilara felt the golden thread in her chest pulse with perfect contentment. She had found her home, not a place, but a person, not safety, but love, not an ending, but a beginning that stretched ahead of them like an endless ocean of possibility. The girl who had bought a one-way ticket to anywhere had discovered that sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never plan to reach. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin the moment you stop running away and choose to stay.